So the first question would be, how many books did you publish?
I think I'm up to number 7 novels. 2 translations with my wife from Japanese into English. Books written by a young autistic Japanese man. And I've done a bit of screen work for Netflix, but that's kind of it.
Okay. And then I wanted to ask you, how many awards did you get?
This will look really pretentious, but I kind of don't. I don't really. I just do my best to forget them afterwards.
I tried to find all of them and I couldn't. But just to mention, apart from 2 short listed, 2 novels shortlisted for Booker Prize, you also won for your first novel. You got the award. And then the list started going on from there.
Well, I have to give these things to somebody, you know.
Okay. Well, David, it's really difficult to introduce you. I'm sure that everybody here knows a lot about you.
If so, thank you.
And that they have read
but
the
no
novels.
problem if you've never heard of me, that's
already 5
fine.
out of 7 translated into Croatian. And I'm sure that a lot of the people in the audience read them in English as well.
This is the new one.
Yes.
Nice jacket, Boris. Thank you. Nice work. This is the first time I've seen it, so that's a bit exciting.
So I would like all of you to raise your hand at one point. I will ask David a few questions, and then there will be questions for audience from audience. So please join us in. This is conceived as a conversation of all of us together.
And in return, you get 7 years good luck for the first question. This is something they do in Japan, so it must be true. So the first person gets 7 years, the second person gets 6 years, and it kind of goes down. But be the first question, and then go out and buy a lottery ticket tonight. And I promise you good things, well, I almost promise you good things will happen.
Well, I get to ask the first question without all the awards. Thank you for this reading, which is beautiful.
Thank you.
But I didn't know that you write poetry. Because I thought that you were a novelist. And I was trying to search about you, about some, these early years, or some things that you are ashamed of, and you hid it away. But I didn't know that you wrote poetry.
I don't. I really don't. Seamus Heaney writes poetry. I have too many friends or people I know in Ireland who are poets. I would never call myself a poet. They are the gods of Mount Parnassus. They are at the top, and then are short story writers, and then further down the hill, actually at the bottom of the hill where all the effluence just sort of dribbles down. That's where the novelists live. That's where I live. I wrote this as a sort of a prose poem because the protagonist, as you now understand, he lives at a different, or he in fact, it's Richard. He lives at a different speed of time, and I wanted to sort of show stylistically how different he is to us. So that's why there's this iambic pentameter. Ooh. That's why there's an iambic pentameter. It drifts in and out a little bit, but I wanted to kind of what's my word? To replicate, to sort of show that he lives at a different speed of time by having a different tick-tock, 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 throughout it. But that doesn't make me a poet. It just makes me a smart ass.
But it does make Vlatka Valentić, who translated your short story, amazing translator she is, as she is. So I would like to tell you that Vlatka Valentić translated
that's so cool,
this one.
So she sort of
she translated
infused it
yes,
with rhyme.
Exactly.
Oh, how cool is that?
Yeah.
What's her
Now
name?
you have to, Vlatka Valentic. Now you have to learn Croatian to be able to appreciate your Croatian translation of the story.
I will clone myself and put my clone to working the Croatian, but that's fantastic, and we should give her a round of applause.
Yes, please.
Maybe we can do it right now.
Yeah.
I've done a little bit of translation myself now, and it just confirmed what I always suspected. It's the translators. They are the unsung heroes of Europe, of anywhere, of any time two cultures meet. Someone has to do the linguistic work, and in literature, in international literature, kind of what we do. I think, well, in a perfect world, the translator's name would be on the cover of the book in the same size font as the author. I think they're that important.
Yeah. Well, you have yourself the experience of translating from Japanese as well.
With my wife.
With your wife, but
who's more clever than I am.
Ah, okay. So you were typing. You were typing and she was dictating.
Not that much cleverer. She did the first draft, then we went through it together. I took notes, so I made a third draft. She then compared my third draft to the original, gave me notes back, so I made a fourth draft. And then that turned into the fifth draft, which was the finished book. So it's a lot of work, and
it is.
I can't be right or wrong when I'm a creative writer. When I write fiction, I can be good or bad, but I can't be right or wrong. It's a translator kind of attempts the impossible. They can never be right. They just have to be the best, least wrong that it is possible to be. They're amazing.
And negotiate.
They're so clever.
Yeah. But tell me now that we are talking about translations and you having experiences in that, but when you are writing, do you ever think of who's going to translate this? You have been translated into, what, 30, 40 languages? And have you ever thought of who is the poor person translating this rhyming story into their language?
There's a long answer. Well, not very long, but longish. I used to think about it. So when I wrote my first one or two novels, and I didn't have any, and I never dreamed that my prose would ever be translated by anyone. I never thought about it, of course. Who would ever want to? Who would want to translate my crap? Basically, is sort of what I thought. Then it started to get translated. So then I did start to get self-conscious, and I almost started to edit and to censor. But then I had a great conversation with my Dutch translators. They work as a team. They're also brilliant. And I know they're brilliant. This is how you know they're brilliant. It's when you do an interview with a foreign journalist who speaks, of course, the into language as a native, and when that journalist who, or a person like yourself, it's when that person who has no commercial interest in the book or any personal interest in me. It's when this person says, "God, that's a good translation," and I didn't realise you could say in English. I didn't realise you had a phrase for this in English. And that's when you know it's a really good translation. So that's why I know my Dutch translator is really good. So my Dutch translator said, I gave the example of a joke. You know, there are translatable jokes and untranslatable jokes. So a translatable joke is a skeleton walks into a bar and the skeleton says, "Hello, I'd like a beer and a mop, please." Yeah. Okay.
That.
Now that should work in any language. However, wood termite walks into the bar. You know, this little insect that eats wood. So a termite walks into the bar, and he says, "Hello, where is the bartender?" Now, that's an untranslatable joke because it needs English. It needs the bartender because it wants the nice, juicy, tender wood to eat. And then a person who looks after a bar, as I'm sure you all know, is a bartender. So I was speaking about this with my Dutch translator, and I said, so should I do the skeleton or should I do the termite? And he said, do whatever you want, because if you do an untranslatable joke, then we will think of a joke in Dutch that's better than your joke in English. And that just liberated me. I'm lucky in that I'm a literary-ish writer, so people like Boris, my publisher here, approaches the best literary translators in the country, whether it's Croatia or here or France or wherever else, whatever the in-two language is. So, yeah, like a rock star throwing himself onto the crowd and hoping they will catch him and let him crowd surf. I also sort of throw myself onto the ingenuity and the imagination of the translator and trust that they will do a good job. And the feedback is generally good. But that is why they should have their names in the same size font, because it's their book as well. So,
Boris, I hope you're listening to this. The sixth one should be with the name of the translator on it. But let's go back to the story and to the notion of time that you were talking about.
Sure.
And the language and the style that you adjusted to that type of a story. I was wondering, the time is almost a character in your novels, not only in this story, but in everything that you write. Time is so an important dimension. And my question would be, how is the time connected to narration? You partly answered it with this story, but how is it connected to the narration of your novels? Because the story is a short text, in a way, and novel is kind of a time-consuming itself. So how do you stretch the time or compress the time in the novel? How do you translate the time into, and why is time so important for you?
There's about 5 questions there.
Yes, I know.
I'll go in reverse.
I'll pass it to the audience after this.
I'll do my best. Probably in reverse order, because my memory is bad. Why is time important to me? Why would time not be important to anyone? We live in it. We need a place to live. We need the 3 dimensions of space. Thank you. Height, width, breadth. But we also need a when to exist in as well. Time is the metronome of our lives. Time ages us. This face in the mirror changes over time. Time is as important to us as water is important to a dolphin. It's kind of what we live in. And I like to write about things I'm curious about, things I'm interested in. So this includes time, which is a bit of a rubbish answer, but it's the best one I've got. What else? So yeah, I think St. Augustine said about time, obviously in more impressive biblical language, he said, I understand exactly what time is until I have to explain it. And isn't that true? Words about time, there's something contradictory about them.
But still, you translate the time into the words. So when we are reading a novel of yours, then we are kind of, as readers, completely immersed or submerged into that novel time. So it is an art in itself, and you translate the time into the words.
Thank you for the kind things you say that you smuggled through in your question about my writing. I'm just trying to think of something reasonably intelligent to
okay. I'll ask you another question.
It is really interesting stuff. It's just I find it hard to talk about. time is a dimension in a book. There is an infinite number of ways to tell the same story from different perspectives, from different characters, from different points of view, but also within different time spans. And I think you just choose the time span for a novel that feels right. Do you try to condense the whole novel into a day, or does this novel feel like something that should last for 60 years? You just sort of do what feels right. It's like a composer. You make a tune, a melody, and this is a bit too sweet. Let's put a minor chord in here, and let's chop it up a bit. And no, that's too choppy. Let's smooth it off again. And you just sort of work at it like this until you feel you've got the right one. And I work at a novel until, well, usually in the early stages, I think about the timing and the pacing of it. But I can change at the later stages as well. I just continue to try different speeds until I feel like I've got a speed until the time in the novel feels that it is in harmony with the other elements of the novel. Does that make sense? And is it more reasonably intelligent than the rubbish I said before?
Well, hopefully it is. But now I have a new question. Okay. Now that you're talking about the speed and the way you kind of model or shape the novel, and that is another dimension, which is space.
Space we'll come on to. I want to give the jazz pianist Bill Evans the last word about time. He said, "Time is what stops everything happening all at once."
Nice.
That's great, isn't it?
That's very nice.
And Bill Evans, he doesn't just play the notes; he plays the spaces between the notes. That's why he's so great. And there's something of this in writing as well. Time is what stops the whole story happening all at once. And so you just think about the spaces, I guess like an actor does on stage. Make them wait, but not too long. And you just get an instinct, I hope, for the Goldilocks, not too long, not too short, just the just right space. The final frontier.
But that is actually, the space is connected to that, or the other dimension, which is in order to create these suspense or the waiting, which is not too long or not too short, you kind of from novel to novel you invent a different structure of the novel, and so they're not necessarily linear stories. They can be, but they can be very chopped up and then kind of put in a collage in a way. So I would like you to just mention briefly about how do you structure the novel, because it is a sculpture in a way.
Thank you. Structure we're talking about. I like structure. One answer is to slightly cheekily kind of invert your question and say, why would it be true that all novels that one author would write need the same structure or should have the best structure? It's very clear to me that if you're writing about one thing in one way, you're going to need one structure. Write something completely different in a very different way, you'll need a different structure. I think that novels are made of 5 things. I'll try to remember them. I'll look a real fool if I don't. There's plot and character. These are propulsive forces. These are where you want to go faster and faster and faster and faster. Really successful airport bestseller novels, they're basically plot and character and not much else. The other elements, 1, 2, 3, and 4 are theme, which we could also call ideas, and style, just the quality of the language, the how of the writing, the which words. These are the opposite of repulsive would be retardant or decelerative. Fancy words for
Very
this time
fancy.
of day.
I didn't even...
But these are the breaks, because you look at that idea. Hey, I've had that idea, but I've never seen it written down before. That makes you stop. That brings you out of the story. Or just look at you, you beautiful metaphor. You are gorgeous. Ooh. This makes you stop. What a lovely piece of writing. That's just, I've never seen those 5 words in a sentence, and you're so beautiful. That stops you. That's why these are the breaks. 5th thing is structure. Structure's exciting because there are still ways to be relatively new. There's still room to think of structures or to devise structures that no one has really done very much, or maybe even at all. That's exciting. And so, yeah, that's maybe why I'm attracted to it. But it's these 5 elements need to work together. And I think sometimes the opportunity to be inventive with structure is lost. It's not really thought about. It's not considered. I'll just tell the story, A, B, C, beginning, middle, end. There you go. And often that's perfect, and often it does work. But it's sometimes fun to think about completely different structures for the same story, and what will that do to the plot? What will that do to the experience of reading it? Might you want to adjust the style? Might this itself be a kind of a theme? Or might the structure mirror or reflect the themes or the ideas in the story? Am I making sense?
Yes,
Okay,
very much.
right.
But now that we have covered the time and the space, then
It's very
the
Einsteinian,
time
isn't it?
The time and
It's great.
space is populated by all this kind of the whole world of characters in your novels that pop from one novel to another, from one story to another. It's almost like a crazy family or inmates of an institution.
Yeah, yeah.
But what is your relation to them? How do you? I mean, do characters visit you after you write a story? Do you talk to them? Why do you keep sending them? The character from this story, one of the characters from this story that you've read, is
He's from the Bone Clocks.
is it on? Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Why
so
indeed?
that's something that you often do.
Yeah, I do. I did like to do this, and the reason has changed down the years. In the first 1 or 2 books, I did it just because I thought, hey, this is cool. That was it. Nothing more profound than that. I'm sorry if you came out this evening thinking that I'm this sort of deep, profound, best-selling international writer. I'm really pretty shallow. That's the truth. But then I noticed, say, 3rd or 4th book, that when you do it, they also bring luggage with them. If you believed this character in the first novel, and then the same character appears again, they bring associations with them. You know their history. They're not strangers. It's the difference between a meeting with an old friend you knew 8 years ago and haven't seen for a long time, and someone you're just meeting at a speed date now for 30 seconds. You have history with them. Also, if you believed that they were real, so to speak, in the first book, and then they appear, they sort of bring this, I'm sure there's a word in German for it, but this sort of reality concreteness with them, and just zip open the suitcase and spill it out into the new novel. So that's reason number 2. And reason number 3, there's a third one. I'm sort of torn in the way I want to use my lifetime supply of imagination. I want to do 2 things. I want to write lots of very, very different, shortish, individual novels about completely different things with light years between them in terms of theme and everything, all the 5 elements. But I also, so I'm a minimalist, but I'm also a maximalist. I kind of want to paint little miniature portraits of people just about this big. But I also want to do these huge, great canvases, these sort of space opera-sized things as big as that. I want to do both, but of course you can't. But you can if characters appear from one novel to another, because this makes all of my novels chapters in one kind of meta-novel or uber-novel. This is how I can have my cake and eat it as well, which is...
So there are wormholes in between the galaxies?
Yeah, they're wormholes that... it might be a sculpture in this museum. In fact, it's a wormhole that's permanent and connects sort of this globe of a novel here, and there's some wormholes coming through to this one, and there's another wormhole coming through here. So it maybe looks like the nucleus of an atom or something like this, perhaps.
Shall we ask the audience
yeah,
questions?
Sure.
So
who would like the 7
time
years?
for your questions. Can we have some lights, please, so that we can see you?
Oh, I can see you for the first time. Hello. Thanks for coming.
There are 2 mics walking up and down on both sides, so just raise your hand. And
who's going to go for the 7 years? There's a gentleman in a red T-shirt there whose eye jumped out. Who jumped out. I'm starting to lose my eyesight, incidentally, just beginning to. So if I get your gender wrong, then apologies. It's me. It's not you.
At least you don't have glasses, so I think my sight is worse than yours. But anyway, I was wondering what your answer would be to literary snobs who think that fantastic elements or, God forbid, genre should interfere with high literature.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. I got that after my book before last, which is called The Bone Clocks, which had some elements of fantasy in it. And in fact, this has some sort of horror, ghosty stuff going on too. Well, my answers would be The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. Another answer would be 1984. Another answer would be Brave New World. Another answer would be... Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie. Another answer would be most of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Ursula Le Guin. So these would be my answers. I would say that, and then I would smugly say, mic drop. And I think that would be the argument won, pretty much. What do you think? Okay, great. Thank you.
Raise your hand. Oh, there's one question there.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. My question would be, well, your stories are amazing, clearly, and if you could tell us something a little bit about your creative process. Do you, first of all, do you write every day, just like regular people go to work and then we just work for 8 hours? Is that what your working day looks like? And also, regarding your stories, do you know in advance the entire story? Do you have it in your head like a frozen snowball or something that kind of dissolves into words little by little that fill your pages? Or do you just work on your story as you go along?
Great, thank you. Nice metaphor. I'll steal that and put it in my notebook. The snowball metaphor from Zagreb. So, in reverse order, your second question first. No, I don't know really how the stories will end. I think of it like a long and winding road, but through the alphabet. But I only know B. I know I want the story to go through E and F. I don't know how I'm going to get from F to M, but I know that this M is going to be good because there's a good scene there. I know I want this to happen, and I know this will probably happen at the end, but this has to happen to make that ending happen. So it's like a very sketchy road journey, and I can only see how to get from F to M when I get to F, even though I know a few things that will be happening later. So it's a little bit of both. Some planning and lots of working out the characters' motives and what would look good here, what would feel right here as I go along. I often forget that, even now. I kind of think, oh, I don't know what to do now, I'm stuck, what happens next? Because I haven't got to the proper point yet. I haven't written all the way up to there. I haven't really got to next. That's what I'm trying to say. Process, yeah, it's my job. I love it. I've got 2 kids in different schools, in different school-run directions, which is a real nuisance now. But never mind. So I drop off kid B. My wife probably takes kid A in. Then I love my children, but it depends on the day. You know, I have responsibilities as a dad and as a husband, and there's paperwork. I have to do my tax returns when I go back. I hate that so much. I have an accountant, but I even hate the pre-accountant bit. I have to get everything ready for the accountant. That's even worse. I just, nightmare. So it's always a question of writing as much as I can between things and neglecting jobs for as long as I can. And I work till late as well, and kind of until I fall asleep pretty much. So that's my working day. Not very orderly, quite chaotic. But it's the last thing I think about at night, first thing I think about in the morning. But I love it. I love it. I love writing. Thank you for your questions. For 5 years, good luck.
So, do we have hands?
Not for
Don't be
5
shy.
years. Hello.
Oh, there is a question here. Dunya, can you just bring the... Here.
But you'll have to answer it.
And then you get this one.
Well, thanks. Well, first of all, you really have a wild imagination, but turning a book critic into a guardian angel, it's really as quirky as it gets.
Yeah. It's quite a transformation, isn't it?
Yeah, you're treating critics well, I don't think many writers would write that. But actually, I wanted to go back to your earlier novel, Black Swan Green.
Sure.
Because you have really, you talked about how you have different genres, so many characters, many times, many spaces, and you really jump through all that stuff. And then you write this novel about an artist as a young man in a small English region, and you really, it's how do you say, basic in a good way. You have one place, one time, one plot, one character, and how come that you decided to return to the basics in this novel?
Well, thank you. So the book before was called Cloud Atlas, and sort of that's probably the thing that I've written that has sold most, and I'm very grateful to it. But I was about 30, 33, 34, 35 when I wrote Cloud Atlas. That came out, and yeah, kind of that was probably my... If I was the Eagles, that would be my Hotel California. It's sort of the one, okay, him, yeah. We can forget the rest of it, just read Cloud Atlas. But then when I was doing the publicity for that, I think also because I was younger, I sort of became Mr. Postmodern Novelist. I became Mr. Youngish English postmodern writer. And I then looked at older writers in their 50s who also had a big hit earlier in their careers, and then they'd written the same book again and again and again to try to, consciously, unconsciously, I don't know, perhaps they were afraid to try anything else, I don't know. And it would depend upon the case, I'm sure. But I saw older writers slowly fading away because they were trying to reproduce their hit over and over again. And I didn't want that to happen, so I thought, what's the opposite of Cloud Atlas? What can I write that's really totally different, that will stop me being young Mr. English postmodern writer? And Black Swan Green was, in some ways, that's sort of a typical classic first novel. So I sort of like to say, I wrote my first novel fourth. It's about speech disfluences and stammering and just being a kid and being insecure and things we all go through. And it was completely different, as you say, to Cloud Atlas. So that was why, really. I didn't want to become what I was afraid of becoming, and Black Swan Green was a part of the antidote.
It was a good antidote.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Shall we swap?
We just have too many.
Hey, now we got loads.
So who wants this microphone?
We may be out of questions, I wonder.
If no one will ask, I have one question, if I may.
Yeah, of course you may.
No one has to bring the mic to me.
Hi. Thanks for working tonight.
So you were talking about finding the right structure for a story you're working on. I was wondering, do you do different versions of a story, having this in mind? All of this combination regarding composition and so on.
I find the right structure by going wrong. And to young writers in the audience, I think this is fairly common. You start on a novel, you think you have the right structure, you get about to 30,000 words, and you have this little growing sense in your stomach that something's not right here, and you ignore it for a bit, and you carry on, and you think it's just a lack of self-confidence, but no, it's actually getting more and more impossible to ignore. And that impossibility is usually because you've got the wrong structure. And it is your friend, because it is good to find that you have the wrong structure early on. I used to kind of think this was awful, because I'd spent 5 months and 30,000 words in the wrong direction, but actually it's not. A lot of what you've written you will still use, but you have to go wrong in order to see how to go right. Is that an answer to your question? Does that work? So, yes, your mistakes are your allies. But that little voice that this isn't working. Keep going for a while, but at some point it becomes impossible to ignore, and then it becomes your friend. It becomes an advisor.
I have a question now. You wrote a novel on Twitter. So how does structure work in that
it's just
sense? Did you write it and then you just tweeted sentence by sentence, or you were writing it as you were as you tweeted? Or you were tweeting it as you were writing it?
It wasn't a novel on Twitter. It was a story. Okay. Although the story then turned into a novel. Okay. It turned into Slade House. So I wrote a story which is actually the first fifth of the novel. But it's not written in tweets. I kind of retranslated it back to non-Twitter-ese, to non-Twitter-ish. I wrote the story first and then chopped it up into little tweets, and it was only 140 characters back then as well, so they were really short. And yeah, that was very, very limiting. But
that's also cheating, right?
It's
cheating.
Cheating, madam.
You,
Are you calling
write
me
a story
How
and then
dare
you chopped
madam?
it into the segments and then you tweet.
Well, it is and it isn't. Because of the limit, you can't do more than one thing in a tweet. So you can either push forward the plot, you can describe a character, you can describe a moment, you can show something beautiful, you can do a surprise, but you can't do any more than one of these things. And even then you have to keep the names really short, because if you've got a character called if you have a character called Benedict Cumberbatch, then that's half your tweet gone just in one name. So
And you
I didn't
have to
really
keep
chop
the
it up.
interest. Yeah.
Maybe yeah. I mean, sure. It was very challenging, but that's why I did it. The more devious the straitjacket, the more audacious the act of escapology to get out of that straitjacket has to be. So you can sort of maybe trick yourself into being actually original for once. And it also made me realise that when we read a page, we sort of read it simultaneously as well as sequentially. Our eye flickers back to the top, and let me just check that again. Oh, yeah. We might jump forward, and actually, no, I didn't read that last bit properly, so let's go back. We look down on a page of prose like a balloonist looks down on a landscape. But when you're sort of when you're strapped to the speed of Twitter, it's more like experiencing the narrative from a fast train through a sequence of tunnels, which is pew, pew, pew. So you have to sort of work out how to make sure the reader won't get lost. So I wasn't quite cheating.
Okay. Sorry for accusing you of that. So are there any more questions that are not offending our writer here?
Oh, just one more.
There is?
Before you start to write a novel, do you know the end already?
Do I know the end? No. I might think I do, but I also know that what I think the ending might be probably won't be, because experience tells me that. You can usually find a better one as you go along, I think. In most cases. But it's also true that every novel's different. Yeah. The writer's the same, but the novels are sort of different, like two parents having children. The DNA is the same, but they can turn out very differently. Thank you for your question.
There is a question upstairs. Yes. On the left side.
I'm afraid we're down to about 1 year. Good luck now, sir. Sorry, but...
Now you have to come up with something.
Please, what is the idea of Cloud Atlas to you? What does it mean to you? What, in short sentences, or just the meaning of it to you?
The words or the...
No, not the words
novel.
of the whole story.
Okay. About 12 years ago, when the novel was fresh in my mind, I could give you probably a really great answer to that. But I've written so much since. It's like it's sort of an early novel in my head now. It is a study of different types of predacity or aggression. If you like violence, the way that an individual can prey upon another individual, the way that a society can prey upon an individual, a way that an individual can prey upon a society, a country, a tribe, capitalism or consumerism upon the soul. So there are many different sized, unequal conflicts throughout the novel. And the thing that stays with me most about the book, which I happen to write, but the thing that stays with me is that. It's a variation, it's a suite of variations upon that theme. What happens? What does it mean when a predator preys upon a prey? And there are many different types of predators, many different types of prey in the novel. That's my short answer. The long one would require a couple of beers. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Shall I get back to the stories? What do you reckon?
Yeah, well, I have another one. You were now talking about sweet, and then you...
Sweets or sweets?
You mentioned a suite of... or
sure,
sweet,
sure.
or
Fine.
whatever, my pronunciation
no,
is maybe bad.
No, your pronunciation is
But
great.
you mentioned
My
music,
ears
and we
are going
talked
and my
about
eyes.
rhythm earlier. So I was wondering, when you write, do you listen to do you listen to music, or are you listening to the music while you're writing? and because it kind of features as a reference in your books, but I don't know if it's actually a thing that you do while writing.
Sure.
And what do you listen to?
Fine. Like most of us, I'm sure, I love music, and music's a great reason to be alive. And I'm a bit of a music nerd, I suppose. I'm learning the piano, but I'm still not that good. And that's just like when you asked about time, what I'm interested in gets into the novels because I'm curious about it, and a novel is a way to learn more and to think more about something. And I'm also not that special. If I'm interested in it, then I can trust that other people will have an interest in the same thing. That's why music is there. The novel I'm doing now is all about music, which is really hard because novels don't have speakers. So I think Frank Zappa said that writing about music is like dancing about architecture. It is like, you can't. But I like that impossibility. And just to work out how I can write about it. You know, a page of description about a band playing on a stage is going to be quite dull. It's just description. But a page of descriptions about people's faces listening to the music, that's interesting. Kind of the human response to music. So I'm thinking about music a lot at the moment just because of the new book, which is about a psychedelic folk rock band at the end of the 1960s, mostly. Do I listen to music when I work? Yes. You probably have a phrase in Croatian as well, but displacement activity. Do you know that phrase? It's what you do when you should be doing something else, but you do this thing first because it's a delaying tactic.
Procrastination.
Yeah. Now,
tasks.
I love writing, but I don't love starting to write. I kind of do all sorts of other things. I sort of clean the toilets or make another slice of toast or just do anything apart from actually sit down. Then once I have sat down, it's great. But I sit down, open my laptop. I know I should click on the file from a new book, but first I go to Spotify or go to iTunes or something, and okay, what can I listen to now? And so it's one more. But I do find it actually helpful just to get me started as well. It's like on a motorbike, you have the kickstart thing. So music, it mustn't be in a language that I have any knowledge of.
It mustn't, or it must?
Because the words, it's like when you're trying to do...
So what are you listening to now? Well, I mean, what do you listen to now while writing this novel?
Another
folk, psychedelic.
Oh, right.
Japanese. I know you speak Japanese, so you can't listen.
Correct. Early instrumental Pink Floyd is perfect.
Oh my God.
It can be a little bit distracting, but it's the right era, so that kind of works. What's best is actually music that is, to use Goldilocks again. It's not so textured that it'll pull you out. So Metallica will be problematic because it's got lots of kind of hooks and.
Do you ever listen to classic music, or it's always pop and rock and?
Well, it mustn't be so textured.
Jazz.
It mustn't be so textured. So all of these, but it mustn't be textured enough to pull you out. But it must be stimulating enough just to, if you do drop out of writing, it must be stimulating enough to sort of push you back. So Baroque music's pretty good, for example, but Wagner isn't. Or Bill Evans is great, but Thelonious Monk isn't. So it's in that Goldilocks zone. Brian Eno is perfect writing music. It's this beautiful ambient wash. And of course, there's Spotify these days, so you can just sort of do Brian Eno, and then it'll give you 1,000 other Brian Enos. So you never have to look at what you're listening to again, really, or for 3 or 4 hours.
Okay. Well, unless you change your mind and you have other questions, you haven't. We still have a film after this. Cloud Atlas will be screened here at 8, and you prepared 2 more stories to read. So I just wanted to ask you, first I wanted to tell you that another translator, Sasha Stanchin, translated the stories that you are going to read now. Sasha. Great. And also great translations, but I would also ask you to tell us not about the stories, we will hear them and read them, but these stories that you are presenting or reading today in Zagreb, they haven't been published, right?
That's right, yeah. They're parts of an occasional work in progress. I'll publish them one day, but I need to do more.
Are they a part of the same piece?
Suite?
Yes, sweet.
Yeah. They're evolving. My son's autistic, and I've been thinking for a while how I can write about this interestingly, non-intrusively, not depressingly, in a way that feels in a way that's sort of in harmony with who I am as a writer as well. And so these next 2 stories are, and well, my answer is to sort of not have autism in the middle of it, just to write about a family and the extended family and the postman and all the people in whose lives the autistic kid is. So just to do these little micro stories, really short, a few hundred words long, but quite a lot of them, and to build up a kind of cubist portrait of autism this way. And I hope by doing this, I can also show that autism can make life interesting, challenging, difficult sometimes, but it's not a life sentence of tragedy and misery and dismay and despair as well. So I can't change my son's autism, but I can certainly change my own attitude towards autism. And I think perhaps because I have something of a platform as a writer, I can also help to normalize autism and to change maybe just my own small way. I can help to modify or improve or become part of a movement that is improving society's view of autism. That can be changed.
Because I'm sorry, before you start reading, in the interview that you gave to the Croatian papers, you actually talk about that, about your mission to kind of raise awareness of autism as not as an illness, but not of autistic people not being victims, and to take away the stigma.
They're heroes. Now, this isn't to patronize them. It is involuntary heroism. They have to do it. We never think of, and it's not just autism. It's people who've had strokes. It's people. It's people with Down syndrome. Many things can shift your life off the most common, regular path most trodden. Many things can do this. Personal tragedy. Depression can do it. Schizophrenia can do it. Suddenly you're not walking along the same path that it looks like a majority are walking along, and you have to work out how to survive in a world that is designed by people on the main path. In the case of autism, we live in a neurotypical, that's us, so people who don't have autism can be called neurotypical people. We live in a neurotypical world. If you're neuroatypical, if you're autistic, then you have to live here, and it's not easy. And if any of us were just magically transported into an autistically wired brain, we would be sectioned. We would be in an institution for real by 11 o'clock this evening. We couldn't survive it, but they do. They survive here. And well, if that's not heroism, I don't know what heroism is. It's remarkable. We forget that. We just see the inconvenience, the kind of the money, the drain on the educational budgets. We only see it in negatives. We don't see it in positives. So, sorry, I'm on my soapbox here, but I would like to try to change this. And so the two stories I'm going to read are you don't really know they're about autism, and that's sort of what I want to try and do. I want to write stories that people are engaged with and interested in, and turning the page even before they know it's about autism.